in finite supply because it's scarce in the earth, but gold has properties that are unique to. And then we invented currency to substitute for gold, but what gave the currency its value was the gold that was backing it up. So you and I could trade with each other in gold without any of us having to physically hold the gold in our hands, because we could use a paper representation of gold. Well, now we could use a virtual representation of gold. So with the computer, with the internet, blockchain, it's much easier now for parties to transact in gold without actually having to have physical custody themselves of the gold. And so they could do that. Most of the transactions in dollars, the people don't have physical bills in their hands. They're dealing with bank deposits. The dollars are custodied at some bank. Well, you could just as easily do that with gold. But I've never bought into the finite supply argument of Bitcoin, because it's a finite supply of something of which there is an infinite supply of alternatives. Gold is in finite supply because it's scarce in the earth, but gold has properties that are unique to it. And yes, there are other metals, and in some cases they can substitute for gold, but in many cases they can't. But even there is a finite supply of other metals that you could use in replace of gold if gold were too expensive. But when it comes to Bitcoin, there's a finite supply of Bitcoin that has been, manufactured by man, right? Not like Bitcoin, like gold, where the finite supply is a fact of nature, and we can't do anything about it. We decided arbitrarily, somebody decided to limit the supply of Bitcoin. It's not that there's some other factor other than a self-imposed limit. But there is no limit to the number of cryptos that can be created. Donald Trump created one. He created two. There's Trump coin, there's Melania coin. There's a limited supply of those, and you can transfer your Trump coin around, just like Bitcoin. Now people say, well, that's a meme coin. Well, as far as I'm concerned, Bitcoin is a meme coin. That's basically why it has value. It's because of perception. It's because of confidence. Well, if people start to have confidence in Trump coin, well, why is that any, not as viable as Bitcoin? So I don't think Bitcoin would work, because I don't think there's any real way that you can have confidence in its future value, because you have no way of knowing whether or not the bubble will continue for any particular number of years. At any moment, the whole thing can collapse. And so you can't really central banks can't hold a bunch of Bitcoin and have any certainty as to what those Bitcoin may or may not be worth in the market. And you certainly can't hold Bitcoin as any kind of viable reserve. Look at what happened when Trump announced tariffs that first time, that weekend, and you had the Mexican peso down 3%, the Canadian dollar, currencies were getting clobbered. Bitcoin that night was down 7%, way more than any currency. Gold was actually up a little bit. So if the Mexican government wanted to prop up the value of the peso, it could have sold some of its gold reserves to do that. It could have sold some of its reserves in Japanese yen, which, were higher that night. Or even other currencies. The Swiss franc was down, but not down that much. And if it held U.S. dollars, it could have sold those. But if it held the reserves of Bitcoin, it couldn't have done anything, because the Bitcoin was down more than the peso, way more. And if they'd have tried to sell Bitcoin to defend the peso, Bitcoin would have crashed even more. So I don't see how it can function as anything it doesn't really work as a medium of exchange in that it's volatile, but it's also slow and expensive. There are much better ways. If I wanted to buy something from you, you would want me to pay you in all sorts of ways other than Bitcoin. Bitcoin would be the most inconvenient, expensive, slowest way that you and I could transact. To the extent that it's used today, it's more as barter. I mean, yeah, there could be some individuals that are accumulating Bitcoin that may accept Bitcoin as payment for something because they want the Bitcoin. But to me, that's more of a barter. And I look at Bitcoin more as a collectible than anything. I mean, people have Bitcoin collections, and that's as long as there's people that want to collect Bitcoins, then there's a market for them. But at some point, I think people will get tired of collecting Bitcoin. I think the main motivation for collecting them is getting rich. There are a lot of other things you can collect that I think you'll have a lot more enjoyment out of the items that you're collecting, more personal satisfaction and stuff like that. I don't think Bitcoin collections are very exciting. But what excites people about a collection of Bitcoins is this prospect that it's going to make them rich. Because Bitcoin is going to be 1 million. It's going to be 10 million. It's going to be whatever, the crazy stuff that Michael Saylor likes to say. But when people have a more realistic outlook on what those Bitcoin may or may not be worth, I think the incentive to collect them will go away. For some people, sure. But it's not, what's wrong with gold? Gold, if you're really worried about inflation and central banks debasing their currency, we got gold for that. We already have a real money alternative. And to me, that's a lot more stable, a lot more reliable than Bitcoin, which, as I said, could just end up being a fad. Just a passing thing. Sure, yeah, it's been around for a while, but I think what's really given it its new lease on life was Wall Street deciding that it could make a buck off of the foolishness of the general public by launching these Bitcoin ETFs. And also, like Michael Saylor, Wall Street is making a fortune off of Michael Saylor every time he sells these convertible preferreds or these, stock as the ATM into the market. Wall Street is just making a huge commission off of this guy. He's like their best customer. He's constantly selling stocks and paying commissions to Wall Street. And they're making a bunch of money on these Bitcoin ETFs. They don't have to do any research, any due diligence. They don't need any analysts. Yeah, but there's nothing. They just buy thin air, and they charge a custody fee. So Wall Street's making a buck off of it. That's that's generally how those guys operate. When the ducks quack, they feed them, right? They don't try to tell the ducks that this food is no good. They just give the ducks what they want, as long as they can make money selling it to them. And now the Bitcoin people have corrupted the political system. They've used their gains from the crypto pyramid to bribe politicians to try to introduce legislation to use the power of government to buy Bitcoin, and just adding on to the pyramid, but now using the power of government, which I think is the most ironic, because Bitcoin was originally started by a libertarian viewpoint, free market alternative to government, and now Bitcoin is completely dependent on government. Government is what's really driving it now. Will government start buying Bitcoin? And that's what people are buying Bitcoin for. They're trying to front run the government, and they're hoping for a big government bailout of the Bitcoin. Well, the central banks are a big part of it. And I'm sure there's, other demand, mainly coming from the East. So I'm sure the Chinese public, India, countries like that, they're still buying gold. Americans have been selling gold. They sold a lot of gold last year. They sold a lot of gold stocks. I mean, they've been selling into the rally the entire time. Gold's up about 50%, and they've just been sell. Well, in some cases, it's because they need the money. In other cases, it's because they'd rather use the money to buy tech stocks or to buy Bitcoin or MicroStrategy or something. So they're either gambling with the money or they're using the money to buy food. It depends on their circumstances. But there isn't a lot of investor demand or demand for gold, in the general public. They don't understand gold, and so they're not buying it. And if they own it, they tend to be selling it. Now, of course, that's not true with everybody. I mean, there are plenty of people who still believe in gold and still buy it in the United States. And I think more and more people are going to start embracing it again. Unfortunately, the price is going to be a lot higher by the time they do that. I don't know that 3,000 is going to be enough.
Yeah.
Maybe 5,000 will. Who knows? But whatever that point is, we're going to find out because gold's going to keep going up. Maybe it's going to take a big crash in Bitcoin to kind of wake people up to the difference.
Mm-hmm.
But or maybe a big drop in the dollar relative to the other fiat currencies that are out there. I mean, gold's gone up to almost 3,000 in an environment where we've had a strong dollar, which is normally a headwind for gold.
Yeah,
and I think the strong dollar has been a headwind because gold would be a lot higher than 3,000 if the dollar was weak against other currencies. I mean, it's weak in terms of what it will buy you. But it on a relative basis, the pound or, the Canadian dollar, whatever, have been even weaker. But that will turn around and we will start to see the U.S. dollar falling in relation to those other currencies. And that will really kick this gold rally into a whole new gear. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. And again, the mainstream media dismisses the rise. They try to come up with some reasons that it's going up so that we don't have to read anything into it. Well, the financial media wants to, push the narrative that everything is great, that the stock market is great, the bond market, the economy. So, gold is saying that that's not the case. So they don't want to acknowledge that warning. So they dismiss it or they try to come up with another rationale for why gold is rising. Oh, it's all the geopolitical uncertainty,
Right,
so don't worry about it. It's not rising because